Really not feeling it this time. It's been a long day, but we'll get through it. So I love panels that have a little bit of absorbency. Too much is bad because it just eats all the strength out of the paint. It gets gummy, it gets sticky. It gets hard to layer, but more so it's less fun, right? It just doesn't have that fluidity or that movement to it. But last week, I introduced the problem of having no absorbency, which is pretty much an oil slick, which creates a hardship too. I'd rather have it a little on the slick side than on too absorbent, but this panel is just right. It's like right in between. It's not my ideal board. The ideal board I make myself with natural gesso, meaning rabbit skin glue and calcium carbonate. It's a paintable chalk. You do a couple layers of that and sand it real good, and then seal it because it's a little too absorbent for just a little while. But then it's magic. Like I do 2 coats of sealing coat, and one of them I put a mid-tone on with. This is just high density fiberboard, basically masonite. Masonite's a brand name. So then I take flat house paint, flat latex house paint, and I feel like it has a really good absorbency. I can make it pretty smooth. It's cheap, it's easy, it's fast. And I like it better than most commercial boards. Certainly cheaper, if that's a concern for you. But really, the reason I do it is because it's very, very convenient, and really like it. So this is a simple setup. I have a photo of the setup that I'll share in just a little while. But for right now, I'm not sharing it just because I really want to get going. I'm right here starting at 9, and I don't know. I didn't get my kids to bed very early. I was reading them a book, and we were just so close to finishing the book. I just kind of had to do it. And they went to bed a little on the late side. All good. So I'm just doing mass conception. I don't really care if it's a pot or an onion or background. Right now, I'm just kind of mapping things out, seeing what my possibilities are. And I'd rather take my time on this part and rush the very end than rush the end or rush the beginning and try to fix it all night. So I can already tell that my composition isn't ideally what I want, but at least by seeing what I don't want, I can problem solve. So I'm going to go wholesale bigger on all my objects. And I feel like as a nice lead in, this onion can come to here, although it's not an onion yet. It's just an abstract shape. And I really, you're going to hear me say abstract probably too many times because I believe in it so much. I'm painting the real shapes that I see, and that's what I mean by abstract. The real shapes mean that when I just look at, when I forget that it's an onion and I look at the real shapes, I squint my eyes, and the only thing that remains is what's essential. And those are abstract shapes. A lot of times they get outside of what the sort of preconceived notion is ahead of time, and I can be a little bit truer to what I see. Now, I'm not a slave to what I see either. I'm going to make decisions as I go. It's not going to be, I'm not beholden to anything on this composition, but I do want to at least somewhat model of where I'm going by what I observe. And again, that's all there when I squint my eyes. It's just, part of it's going to get a little bit off on the drawing because I'm not going to measure much. And not that measuring's bad. It's just Alla Prima, you got only a little bit of time. And for some of the things in here, I'm going to say, you know what, I really like this, even if it wasn't really what I expected or wasn't in my immediate goal. Now, I do have a finished painting in mind. I kind of know where I'm going with brush strokes, and I do have an idea of the composition, although I'm going to keep my eyes open for things that, maybe I didn't anticipate. They're going to be approximations. So everything that I add here is just so simple that I'm not going to protect it. And what I mean by that is, let's say I carefully measure and I got it, exactly in proportion, and I'm doing these really detailed edges and things like that. Well, it might shut off my ability to see relationships that I like, that I might change my mind on, and create the painting that I want, but also modified by what is, right? So there's going to be a little adjustment to be made based on kind of how this presents itself. The painting is going to have a voice. It's not going to be just my, preconceived notion of how this is going to end up. I'm going to make decisions along the way, but I'm also going to make observations and say, hey, that really works. I didn't anticipate that. So now I've pushed the composition to be bigger, but I might have overdone it for what I want. So now I can make a choice. Do I want to make the silver tea kettle that's here smaller and squatter to fit? Or do I want to make the onions a little bit smaller to do a little bit easier time fitting? I don't know if I want the knob. That I think it's a nice little shape to draw. So I'm going to bring that down. And it's okay if I waste time, right? Well, it's never a waste of time to get the composition that you want. It's definitely not a waste of time to lose the drawing lines that I already have, because there's just nothing. There's nothing here. It's not. There's nothing to protect. And so if I move this down, I'm going to get a composition that I feel is going to be better. And again, there's just no reason this early on to compromise anything. But it's also not the time that I like to nitpick the accuracy. I like to have simple shapes that I can relate to each other. I like to do the correction first, if we call it a correction. I don't like to call it a mistake or a correction early on. I like to just call this stage of it as information, and the ability to adapt and make the painting that I want based on not only these shapes, but also the rectangle, how I design the rectangle. I want it to be pleasing early on. A lot of times I don't go for the, really, tried and true maxims of composition. I like to play. I like to, not only plan for, my own take on things, but also I like to just see what the painting tells me, like I said before. Really like to have a center line here. Again, this stage isn't really about absolute accuracy, but I can already tell that this side is bigger than that side. Now that was an old line, so that makes sense, but I can make a choice. For the sake of the composition, I think this side needs to be smaller, not this side bigger. And so when you come to a little reflection point saying, okay, this doesn't look quite right, make a choice. There's usually more than one way to solve the same problem. So if you're thinking of just simply rectangle design and not any sort of authority this tea kettle might have, then you'll have a more intentional painting, not necessarily better, but a more intentional one. So I'm making a smaller tea kettle. I'll probably have to reduce the size of this knob, but I'll worry about that later. And now, just based on everything I see, I left what I knew was too large of an onion for just a little bit, because I'd rather see what I'm comparing it to first. So I already had more information than when I started. Might as well use it. Again, I make mistakes. I do, but I also just kind of go for it a little bit. And when I have something that I'm pretty sure I'm going to change, a lot of times I'll just keep going for a little while longer. And when I make the corrective decision to make it go from close to exactly what I want, or at least close to it, then I'll be doing it from a place of comparison and information. So I probably the reason, more likely than not, that I put things in the wrong proportion to what I want in the composition is just most likely because I didn't have enough information to make the right choice. And so I'm making little adjustments and then I'm erasing the mistake. I do it in that order on purpose because, again, I want to see the influence of the thing that I'm trying to change, and I get to instantly compare it to what I'm going to change it to. And again, that's more information. So the mistake is, again, I think it's a mistake to call it a mistake. It's not a mistake. It's just building of information, and helps me get the painting that I want. So I'm going to go a little bit wider and adjust this side accordingly. I'm using landmarks on the onion for the placement of the pot, and then I'm using my center line to balance the other side, and just part of its feel too. Like there's a height to width relationship that I can measure proportionally to say a width at a point equals half. Okay, is that true? So the width at this point equals more than half. So my proportion is not exactly like the pot. If this were a tiny, tiny bit wider, it would be more like the real pot. So here's the here's two versions of the same conundrum, right? So I could feel like I really should make it more like the pot. And the upside to that is I don't have to interpret anything. I can just look up there and get the real relationships of what's going on there. The other part of that same idea is that if I make it too wide, it occupies parts of the rectangle, and I'm free to make the choice to make it a little bit different than what I see. The thing is just every time I make a a comparison between the shapes and values, I have to then convert it to my new position. So I'm not too concerned about it being exactly like this pot. I am concerned about it being symmetrical, but really even not yet. And the shapes right now are pretty tentative. Again, I'm information building, not faithfully drawing a tea kettle, a teapot. And if it doesn't hit the exact landmarks on my onion, I want to just take a quick pause to say, is there something more appealing or accurate feeling if it did hit the right landmarks? Is the problem where I see it, or is it in another place? So this hits approximately there on the onion, assuming that the onion is what I want. And that's a really quick consideration. The other consideration is that, oh, hey, whoever it is. The other consideration is the other components might be the thing to adjust. So I just want to take a quick pause and not do the knee-jerk reaction. The knee-jerk reaction is going to get me, hopefully, something good. But if I just pause and think of what are my other options, then I'll get a little bit more uniquely what I want. So this is hitting all the right landmarks on the pot, maybe a little bit shorter, but pretty much it's hitting that negative space to the onion. It's hitting about the same landmarks on the onion. Again, if it didn't, that's probably okay. But I can use those proportional tools as a quick check for right now. And then again, every time I see an indiscrepancy, sometimes I'll just say, you know what, I like this new version better, and I'm just gonna go for it. If it reveals that there's a proportional problem that just looks bad, or would make it more accurate, then I'll give that a consideration too. Nothing is set in stone. All right, so getting pretty close to getting an idea where I'm going. Again, I would rather not rush this stage of the painting, but I also don't dwell on perfection either. Very abstract shapes, very suggestive, and I keep my eye open for shapes that I intended to get pretty close, but might be off. But that doesn't mean wrong. It could suggest that, hey, this is a better version. Maybe I'll even want to change the composition to be more like this new version, but maybe it's just something I can leave, something that, doesn't look bad, something I can consider. So once I get this stage, then I'm going to go into maybe just a little bit of scumbling some values for like the shadow shapes and things like that. But after that, it's going to be a big color block in. It's going to be abstract simplification. So this is more mass conception, not really worried about the anatomy of an onion, if there is such thing. But yeah, there is, but it's not a huge consideration. But the big color blocking, the reason that I'm not going to refine these edges to being really, super accurate is mostly because I don't want to protect these drawing lines. I want to block in the big color block in with only what I see when I squint, and beyond seeing what I see when I squint, I'm going to try to divorce what I think these pots and shapes represent, the onions and things like that. I'm going to try to intuitively see exactly what I really see rather than what I think I ought to see, if that makes any sense. It's abstract because these are the unique shapes in front of me, not any sort of preconceived notion. And that's super important for getting a likeness in portrait. It's, maybe not as big a deal for painting onions, because if I'm a little off, so what? Like, nobody will really know. But with a portrait, if you get the skull wrong, if you get the tilt perspective wrong, all those things, even if somebody doesn't have mastery over anatomy, they'll know something's really weird. When I do portrait, it's hard for me to tune off the years and years and years I've had of anatomy training, but it's still worth it to consider just unique abstract shapes to get this unique person in this unique lighting setup. I have to decide whether I mind that shadow runs off. I feel like the pot's a little wide, so I'm going to take all this in. I'm still decision making. And again, I'm not going to rush this early stage. If it doesn't show me what I want, then there is nothing holding me back from making the correction. These are all very simple shapes. Nothing is even remotely set in stone yet. I'm still, wrangling things around until I like them. So I felt like the teapot splayed out too wide. It's hitting landmarks that were not carefully measured. So, those little things are going to happen. Part of it is that I shortened the pot. So maybe I'll just sneak all these lines down. Again, still decision making. These aren't drawing mistakes. These are compositional ideas that morph over time. If I was afraid of mistakes, then I would either, meticulously measure everything or set up site size or, trace a photo or something. That's not the way I like to paint. In fact, I almost never would trace a photo. I'm not judging anybody. It's just part of the creative effort is my interpretation of shapes. So not only do I never really want to shortchange that process because I'm constantly in training, like I always want to keep improving my ability to see and problem solve, but Also too is I want this to be my work, not the camera's work. So again, if anybody feels condemned by that, don't. I'm not your moral authority here, but it's rewarding for me to do the drawing myself. All right, so I like that better. So bringing the onion down, I can make the pot a little skinnier relative to the width by bringing that line down. So everything can shift down about equally, and it'll improve the composition. So again, just feeling like everything's locked in early on, I think is a disservice. I think it's better to, just see where you're going first, and then we can start getting more aggressive. Once I get my 5 values in, so I'm going to get this in with just some of the key darks scumbled in with this sienna, but after that, it's just going to be abstract simplification, uniquely what I see when I squint. It's going to eliminate all the subtle stuff and leave me only the shapes that I see from across the room, the essential shapes. So when I enter a gallery, I don't see the details of the paintings that I see in there. The paintings that I really like attract me from across the room with the essential shapes. Everything else is bonus, and sometimes those bonus details and brushstrokes and things are really, really super cool. But in my case, I don't see the need for going into any of those style notes or details, super soft edges and the like, until I'm happy with the composition and the abstraction. So I'll maintain too that if you're doing the abstraction and then that abstract simplification to where it's uniquely what you see when you squint, you can go in any style direction after that. So it's just, it provides all the essential, it provides the sense of the light, it provides everything that you're going to look for in the finished product, because those shapes endure to the very end. And then, yeah, you want loose brush strokes? Yeah, chunk it on. You want to do a palette knife? Great. You want to refine it to super tight detail? Yep, you've got a great foundation for that. If you've got, the desire for soft, smoky edges, yep, it's going to be great for that too. So you can go in any style direction if you get that abstraction close. And that's the other beauty of abstraction, is that close is all I'm looking for. I'm not looking for precise. Precise builds on the abstract shapes. So I'm very much a realist painter. And when I say abstract, those are real shapes. Those are not, some kind of weird style note. It's the true relationships that I see in my best guess. So beyond that stage is going to be broken down into 5 values. So the pot has 5 values of light, middle tone, turning shadow, reflected light, cast shadow. Each of the onions have their own range of a highlight, middle tone, turning shadow, reflected light, cast shadow. And then I just have to make sure that the light feels harmonious throughout the painting. So when breaking it down into those 5 shapes, I want to represent the color, intensity, and direction of the light. If those are harmonious throughout the painting, I'm going to be in really good shape. And then, it's Alla Prima. Who knows how long I'll take it, but for the most part, I can be the author of that story. I can just say, look, this is as far as I need to take it. It represents a base level of accuracy in the squint level shapes. Everything beyond that is maybe developing the focal point and being done. Maybe I develop the whole thing if I'm up for it or feel like it. But I've got a lot of creative freedom after that. So just based on these negative shapes, I'm pretty happy with where it's going, which means that I can move forward to that next stage. All right, so big color block in next. I'm just going to get a few little paints on my palette, and I'm just going to evaluate this while I do it. Again, I'm off to a little bit of a late start. This wasn't the composition I planned, but I like it. It's just I'm in a little bit of a rush. I spent a little bit long getting my kids to bed, because if you're not in the East Coast, it's late. Well, I mean, if you are in the East Coast, it's late. If you're in the West, it's not so late. But I'm here on the East Coast. It's what, 9:30? I got started a tiny bit late, so yeah, we're about 20 minutes in, maybe. And not rushing. I don't really want to rush, especially this early part. I've said that a few times, but you know, when this plan goes well, and it almost always does, because you shouldn't ever get past these simple stages unless you like it. You know, maybe do a few little measurements and things like that. So I only take it as far as I need to. So when I get to that level where everything's been abstracted, and I like it, and then I refine it into abstract simplification, simply what I see when I squint. And then I break that further into 5 values of light, making sure the story of the light is consistent in the direction, intensity, and color of the light. And then I might start with a focal point, and you know, if it reads well on that focal point and dissolves well into the rest of the shapes, and I'm tired and I want to be done, I might say, yep, that's enough. If there's something still bothering me at that point, I'll fix it. But typically, I don't ever have to completely detail the entire painting, because it works so well on that base level, that abstract level. So when it works well on that abstract level, that's how people see it across the room. You've already got them on their first impression. Usually people don't change their mind from their first impression. If they like it, whatever they see next is going to verify how much they like it. If they hate it, whatever they see next as far as detail and soft edges and brush strokes, not going to rescue it. They've already formed their opinion. So I feel like that's the essential level. Everything from there on, that's your intention for the painting, right? So you put your own personal touch on it at that point. That's where everybody in this system can have their voice, because we're already going to have accuracy. We're going to have means of measurement that keep it all about the simple relationships. We're going to have that ability to walk away from the painting and see if it's harmonious on the big, big level, you know, short of any details. And yeah, you can go in any direction from there. So it's all about personal freedom, right? And then there's clients. Some clients want it to be super duper tight or choppy or whatever. Then you're going to paint their painting. You still start it that way with the system that I've explained. The different fields have a different way of presenting. So medical illustrators will want very precise but rather stylized. They want all the busyness taken out of it, so those labels can mean something. Illustration for like books, magazines, digital games or computer games and things like that. You're talking about more of like telling a story and narration. Fine art realism for like galleries and things. It's more about not necessarily what you're depicting, more about how you're depicting it with the the expressivity of the brushstrokes or the refinement, the composition, the technique. You want to be a little bit experimental so you can be outside of the fray. And there's a lot of different ways of painting that might be conducive to one field more than another. But me, this is Alla Prima. This is my big practice. I can go in any creative direction that I want. I sometimes feel inspired to do it a little bit different than I'm used to doing. And when that happens, great. Sometimes I even have to change my mind at the end. So on Friday nights, I get a live figure model, and I'll have my students and I work together to come up with a crazy challenge, a little bit outside of my comfort zone, and they will sometimes turn out exactly the way the challenge goes. And sometimes it's like you get to a certain point and you have to problem solve. You have to just make it work. And that's the jewel of it. That's why I do it. A lot of people will say, well, why on earth are you doing that? That seems like torture. Like using a 4-inch brush for a figure with single brush strokes, dual light systems, and live on Instagram. I mean, or do every single brush stroke horizontal or vertical. Why to do that? Because when you're outside of your comfort zone, it's still bringing it back to the fundamentals. It's getting training for problem solving, which teaching is mostly about problem solving. Like you have all these fundamentals, they're just not accessible to the student yet. So the student could be able to regurgitate every line from the best art books in the world and still not be able to do it. Well, because they don't have the means of seeing the future stages of the painting, they're not going to be able to problem solve through it. They're going to look at their work as not a stage in the right direction, something to work toward, but they'll see it as good or bad, or they won't be able to see that next step or the possibilities for how to adjust it. And that's where an expert mentor can really help, because especially with all the ability to problem solve using the fundamentals, they can see the next steps. They can see the progress without the the sort of cloud of emotion. So like that feeling of dread that the painting isn't turning out, or it looks bad, and you don't want anybody to see it. I mean, I can't tell you how many students will shield their painting and say, "Don't look at it yet." It's like you realize that you'll probably get the most out of me seeing it right now than you will at any stage in the painting. But again, there's an embarrassment to it when it's not going the way you think it ought to go. And a lot of times it's not wrong. It's just in a stage that needs just a little tweak, a little relationship change between lighting schemes, colors, proportions, compositional notes. So an expert mentor can help through that. There's a lot of really, a lot of times the subject of the painting is really vibrant. In this case, the onions are pretty vibrant. I mean, they're not dull, but there's little shadow notes in this painting that have a lot of potential. I can't wait to get to them. So I'm just kind of feeling my way through right now. Only what I see when I squint. I don't need to see any more. In fact, I'm ignoring highlights right now, and I'll put them in. I see them when I squint, so they'll definitely get in on this early round. But I'm bouncing around the composition because I want everything to be harmonious. And the sooner that I can get everything in, the more I can balance one thing to another. And I don't really care what the style looks like yet. I'd rather have clarity. I don't really need to impress anybody yet. This is a stage that just lay down the groundwork. And when I can take that kind of pressure off, I paint better than if this had to already look cool. I don't like to put that kind of pressure early on. So this is not going to represent highlight. It's just going to be in the ballpark of it. I'm going to put the highlights on with thick impasto. That's a little redundant. Impasto means thick paint. But I'm just getting fields in. So my simple strategy for getting started is, if I had to choose between going too light or too dark, too rich in color or too dull in color on the midtones, I'd rather be too dark and too rich. That gives a foundation of making sure that if you're going to balance that rich, dark middle tone to the shadow, you've got to push those shadows pretty dark. If you push those shadows pretty dark, then you're going to have a really dramatic painting. Further, if your midtone is fairly dark and rich in color, not only are you going to drown out some of that color with the weak colors with brightness for highlight, that's pretty low chroma for highlights, but also you're going to gray the color on its way to shadow, so it's going to get weaker light as it gets closer and closer to shadow, and so it's going to desaturate that way. A lot of times right there, somewhere in this arc of value, that rich color belongs. So again, I'd rather err on the side of rich color, and I'd rather err on the side of dark, knowing that at best this stage is going to be too simple. And if anything's wrong, this is the perfect time to get something wrong. In fact, if you get into the mindset of celebrating when you've made a mistake at this stage, then you're embracing the true magic of abstract simplification. This is where you can see everything without protecting anything. So if you're in a portrait and you put in the eyes and you're detailed and it looks great, and soft edges, eyelashes, the works, you're going to protect those eyes no matter what. You might build it. Let's say you put the eyes in and they look great, but they don't fit on the head, and the head barely fits in the composition. So now you're going to make the head, head size change to suit the eyes, and now the head is different in the composition. It's going to make you change the body, change the way the body fits into the design of the painting. No, the better solution is to move that eye, but because you're protecting it, you're so wed to this beautifully painted eye that doesn't fit in the head that you're just not going to make the changes that you need to make to make it right. And if you did, you'd be disappointed. So that's the second problem. The first problem is that you might have to move that eye that you worked so hard on, and that's really disappointing. The second one is building the entire portrait around a tiny little shape, like an eye, or portrait, for example, but also still life and landscape and everything. And then the third one is the worst, and that's leaving an egregious mistake just for the sake of really like that eye. That's the worst. You're going to end up with a bad painting because people are going to judge it on that first impression. It's not going to be rescued by that eye once they get past that first impression. They've already made up their mind. They don't like the painting. The eye is not going to save it. And so that's the worst of the three, is to settle for a bad painting for the sake of a tiny detail note that you worked so hard on. So I try to avoid that. I'd really rather have the painting be real simple blobs of paint. They might even be harsh edges and things like that. It's fine, right? I don't need it to look right yet. I just need it to get me enough information to make the next right choice. And then I'm going to be in really good shape by the time I get to any sort of decision as far as detail goes, or big choppy brushstrokes, thick impastos, all the things that are going to make the painting exciting. from any which direction, either loose or tight. It's all going to be made up because those relationships of big shape values are going to be pretty close. Pretty close. At most too simple, but mistakes at this level are really great because they stopped you from making that painful decision later to have to fix it when it's detailed or leave a terrible mistake. All right, so this reflected light depends on the background. I think I am going to go with this background. I didn't the last time I painted on this background. I used the Holly painting. The Holly painting had, I just left the raw aluminum panel as the background. I don't even have a floor. It's just, it's kind of floating with the cast shadow grounding it. And it looked kind of cool that way, so I left it. Again, I can make a lot of really different decisions based on how the block-in looks. And at that painting, I just looked at it early on and said, you know what, I don't need a table. It's okay. You know, it's going to look better without it. So, covering a lot of ground really fast. I went from where I thought the most important area was, but that's the most simple too. So, the first place, I guess, I need to move on quickly because there's nothing to justify it being right. In fact, what I just did pinpointed a mistake. Not a mistake. Again, I don't like to call it that, but showed me I needed to adjust that stem. I didn't want to put the highlight dead center. It kind of suggested that I should based on the relationship of the highlight to the stem. And instead of doing that, I'd rather change the stem. So again, there's already a problem solved based on something not working, and that's a triumph. That's a great time to make a mistake. And I might just stay away from some of those little shapes up there, all the little bands and things like that. If I put them in now, I would have to either paint around them or risk losing them. So in either case, you know, I'd rather not paint them. Painting around them would make me paint really, really slow and careful and meticulous. And for that background, I just want to take a big brush and slap it in there. I don't want to be slow and meticulous to get a big field of value like the background in. So I'm not going to protect those tiny little shapes. So I'm not going to paint them, right? It's good enough. Now I can see that I'm going to be cutting in on that neck there. So I can see something that I definitely don't like. And it doesn't bother me. It's going to be something I'm going to fix later. I'm just going to keep it in my mind's eye. And I'll worry about that later. I've done everything so far with a number 6 long filbert. This is from Rosemary. The student was kind and gave me this, and I keep using it as like the 90% brush. So I don't really recommend this, but I'm doing most of this painting with just this one brush. Filberts are great because they give you a line if you're barely pressing, and they give you a mass if you press. You just have to be aware of how much paint is on the brush, because if I'm trying to do a line, it's going to run out of juice pretty quick because the tip of the brush doesn't hold very much. Those tiny little detail brushes hold even less, and that's why people make sometimes sloppy drawing lines, even though their brush is tiny. They're not covering ground because the brush holds almost nothing, and then it starts to mix because it ran out of paint. And in running out of paint, it compelled the artist, who's not aware of what's on the edge of their brush, to press, and that made a mass instead of a line. So if you're painting abstractly, does it matter if this handle, if it's handle or cast shadow? You're drawing with both. It doesn't really matter. Again, that's the nature of abstract. You're not saying this